and welcome to this, the first window in the 2020 TooFatLardies Oddcast Advent Calendar. This year we're going to be opening our Advent calendars in our own homes due to lockdown, but we're still hoping to give you a little insight into the world of Lard. So here, on the 1st of December, I asked Sydney to tell us about his favourite wargaming army.
My favourite Wargames army, which I own, takes a little bit of choosing. There were a few candidates that I could think of before making this selection for the Advent window. I could have picked some of the First World War forces that I built up a few years ago, or maybe my current obsession with the late 17th century French or Imperial forces, maybe some of the older Napoleonics, some of the smaller scale. I had a few choices. But really, when I thought about it, my favourite Wargames army could really only be something which, for us to talk about it, I'm going to have to take you back to the 1980s, to the time before the Berlin Wall came down, when Mrs. Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were in charge, and Games Workshop were barely discovering Space Marines. I was just finishing university. I just about got through my last finals exams, and I decided that I really wanted to create a wargaming army in the Renaissance period. And before that, I'd mainly done Napoleonics or medieval wargaming, or generally anything down the Wargames Club, to be honest, that anyone was putting on. But I wanted to choose something from the late 17th century because, well, I'd been looking at it at university and I thought it was a really interesting period. And I hit upon a set of rules by George Gush. Wargames rules for the 15th to 17th centuries, 1420 to 1700. I came across these in a shop in York in the United Kingdom, and I thought, well, I could put two and two together and maybe build one of the armies which is suitable for those rules. I picked up the army lists as well. A very splendid book which I'm looking at actually now as I record this, although there are quite a lot of coffee stains on the front of it. Now, the rules came out in 1984 and they suggested that these were army lists for use with those rules and creating a number of different armies. So I picked one of the lists, list 48 in fact, and decided that this is the time to build an army based on the Williamite forces of William III as he was campaigning in Ireland and Flanders in the 1690s. What could be better? Nothing could go wrong. And it was just about that time that Copplestone Castings brought out their really lovely range of Grand Alliance figures in 28mm, and I was really set. So I collected the figures and I started to paint them, and they still have them today. They're kind of good for the time, I suppose, especially since I seem to have painted them all in Humbrol enamels, cleaning my brushes with white spirit, and I seem to have used about a size 8 brush on most of them. Possibly not the sort of thing that I would paint these days, but, well, as we'll find out, they served me well in some sort of ways. The army didn't take that long to paint. There was 4 units of cavalry, a unit of horse and a unit of dragoons with a suitably flourishing commander in a red jacket. The first game, they routed a Scottish Jacobite army, holding their salvo fire until the last minute. I was in business, and this was the army which was going to take me to glory at my local Wargames club, and maybe even further afield. Of course, like many Wargames dreams, reality came with a bit of a bump. The knack and the key to winning under those rules wasn't really historical tactics. It was kind of how much armour you had, how fast you had your cavalry charging, whether they carried a lance, axe and pistols, and yes, as many of you have already guessed, and I might have mentioned before, it really helped if you were Polish. Game after game of sad, miserable, depressing defeat followed. The truth dawned on me slowly, inexorably, and truthfully. The army was absolutely hopeless. List 48, had I have looked more carefully, wasn't really Anglo-Dutch. It was, quotes, other Western and Central European armies, 1670 to 1700, unquotes. so nondescript that you got everything in there, really, from the shores of Ireland right over to Russia. It was basically a polyglot mix of cannon fodder or hussar fodder or samurai fodder, because basically if these guys didn't stop their enemy charging down on them, and they were going to be chopped up like sushi pretty quickly. It was absolutely hopeless. They were just trounced in so many games. I took them all over the United Kingdom in various tournaments for a couple of years with friends, and it just didn't get any better. The thing I just couldn't understand was really how Louis XIV managed to rock up, conquering most of Flanders, expanding the frontiers of France quite happily with 400 and 500,000 men under arms, supposedly at one point. But still, an army from that period seemed to be completely trampled under the hooves of winged hussars and Polish pancerni. The salvo firing, which looked to be so effective when I read about it in the various historical accounts of the time, seemed absolutely pretty useless on the wargaming table. And really, those Swedish feathers or chevaux de frise never seemed to stop any of the 100 Years' War French who encountered the army on various different occasions. Almost every one of the games that I played from 1989 to 1995 with my beloved army were ignominious, heavy defeats. The friends who I played with always loved me turning up to one of the club tournaments because they knew that they'd be able to get their 3 points and off to a win quite easily. We had some cracking games and there were some fantastic memories, and I met some wonderful people along the way, even if the army was kind of a joke and utterly hopeless. But I did learn some really important lessons. I learned that when you build a war games army, you're really sensible if you build an army you can love, even when it's absolutely being chopped apart by Polish wing hussars week after week. I also learned that the opponents who are leading those Polish wing hussars were the main thing which was fun about wargaming. It was who you were playing, and even a bad army and a set of rules which were kind of their age didn't make a difference to the game being fun. It was fun with the players I was playing with all the time, even though I was getting chopped up week after week. So that's my favourite war games army. My first Williamite Anglo-Dutch late 17th century army, or, ladies and gentlemen, as it's better known, List 48, other Western and Central European armies, 1670 to 1700. If you ever see it around the table, limping, battered, bruised, ripped apart, and possibly all in rout, with really no rear support or friends within 150 paces, do spare a thought for it, please. It was a lot of fun while it lasted.